I swapped my cheating son-in-law's lube for glue, and the firefighters had to pull them apart. My daughter lived 4 houses down. Her husband, the man I was now calling my ex-son-in-law in my head, had managed to turn their private marriage into a public emergency. The firefighters weren't there for a fire. The paramedics weren't there for injuries. They were there because someone had called 911 claiming a domestic situation, then immediately hung up. Ever watched your family's private pain become public theater? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family, enjoy the story. I never thought I'd be dragged into a scandal that sounded like a bad late-night joke. But when I discovered my son-in-law's double life in Houston, the betrayal wasn't just about broken vows, it was about stolen dignity, hidden bank accounts, and a woman, my daughter, left humiliated in her own home. The night the firefighters came with red lights flashing across the cul-de-sac, it looked like a farce to the neighbors. But behind those closed doors was evidence of a marriage crumbling and a man so careless in his lies that his own shame ended up becoming public record. That was the night I realized comedy and tragedy sometimes share the same stage. What no one saw in those flashing lights was the trail of paperwork I had already begun piecing together: credit card charges in Atlanta, hotel receipts from Dallas, and even a confidential draft of a separation agreement my daughter never signed. What started as a shocking, almost absurd incident became the opening crack in a carefully polished facade. I wasn't chasing revenge, I was building a file. And in that file were the receipts, timestamps, and digital fingerprints that would one day make a judge freeze his assets and turn my daughter's so-called humiliation into his very public undoing. If you've ever wondered how far someone would go to save the ones they love, this story will shake you to your core. Follow along as we uncover a mystery that's been buried in bank statements and buried beneath fake smiles. The firefighters knocked twice before they used the key. By then, I was already counting the neighbors who'd stepped onto their porches. Mrs. Henderson from across the street stood in her bathrobe, arms folded. The Johnsons had their porch light on, trying to look casual while clearly watching every move. 3 houses down, I could see someone taking pictures with their phone. Red and blue lights painted our quiet street like a carnival nobody asked for. The diesel engines idled loud enough to wake anyone who'd somehow slept through the sirens. I stayed at my kitchen window, watching the show while my hands rested on something the neighbors couldn't see, a manila folder thick with evidence I'd been collecting for months. The emergency vehicles had been there 12 minutes. I'd been counting. Not because I was nervous, but because timing mattered now. Every detail mattered. The folder in front of me contained 3 months of careful documentation, and tonight's chaos was about to make all of it relevant. My daughter lived 4 houses down. Her husband, the man I was now calling my ex-son-in-law in my head, had managed to turn their private marriage into a public emergency. The firefighters weren't there for a fire. The paramedics weren't there for injuries. They were there because someone had called 911 claiming a domestic situation, then immediately hung up. But here's what the neighbors didn't know: I'd been expecting this call. Not the emergency vehicles exactly, but some kind of dramatic distraction. Men who live double lives eventually run out of ways to juggle their secrets. When the walls close in, they either confess or create chaos. My research suggested he'd choose chaos. Financial predators count on family silence. Subscribe so you recognize the warning signs before it's too late. Through the window, I watched him talking to the lead firefighter, gesturing with both hands like an actor playing the part of the confused victim. His hair was messy in that calculated way that looked accidental but took work to achieve. Even in crisis mode, he was performing. The firefighter nodded, wrote something on his clipboard, then looked toward my daughter's house with the expression of someone who'd seen this type of call before. False alarms that weren't really false, just complicated. My phone buzzed. Text message from my daughter: "Mom, can you come over? Something happened." I texted back, "On my way. Bringing coffee." What I didn't text, and bringing the folder. I grabbed my coat, picked up the manila folder, and walked toward the door. Outside, the neighbors were starting to drift back inside, the show apparently over. But this wasn't the end of anything. This was the beginning of the most important conversation my family would ever have. The folder felt heavier in my hands than it had moments before. Inside were 3 receipts that had fallen out earlier, all from the same hotel in Atlanta. All from nights he'd claimed to be in Houston for work meetings. As I walked down the sidewalk toward the dying red lights, I realized something that should have scared me but didn't. I was about to destroy a man's life with paperwork. And he'd given me every piece of evidence I needed. 3 receipts fell from the folder. All from the same hotel. None from nights he claimed to be traveling for work. Ever watched your family's private pain become public theater? Drop ready if you'd have been taking notes too. The credit card statement came to my house by mistake. His name, my address. I should have forwarded it unopened. But mistakes have a way of revealing truths we're not supposed to see. The envelope was thin, official, the kind of mail that usually means bills or banks or something boring. I almost tossed it in the stack for my daughter to pick up later. Then I saw the return address. Chase Bank. Account ending in 4729. I'd never seen that number before. My coffee was getting cold while I stared at that envelope. 37 years of marriage taught me to respect privacy, but 12 months of watching my daughter cry herself to sleep taught me something stronger. Sometimes privacy protects the wrong people. I opened it. The statement covered February. 23 transactions. 18 of them in Atlanta, Georgia. 5 in Houston, Texas, where he claimed to live and work. But here's what made my hands shake. The Atlanta charges were all posted between February 10th and February 24th. Those were the exact 2 weeks he'd told my daughter he was stuck in Houston for intensive client meetings. I reached for my phone and called her. Mom? It's early. Is everything okay? Her voice sounded tired. Not morning tired. Soul tired. Honey, I need to ask you something. Where did David say he was the 2nd week of February? Long pause. Houston. Why? And he was there the whole time? No trips to Atlanta? Another pause, longer this time. Mom, he said he couldn't even leave the office. 20-hour days, client crisis. He barely had time to call me. I looked down at the statement again. February 14th, Maggiano's Little Italy, Atlanta. $127.50. February 15th, Ritz-Carlton, Atlanta, $289. February 16th, Tiffany & Company, Atlanta, $347.25. Valentine's Day dinner. Hotel room. Jewelry. None of it in Houston. Mom? Are you there? I'm here, sweetheart. Why are you asking about Atlanta? I folded the statement, creased it sharp, and made a decision that would change everything. Can you come over for coffee? There's something we need to talk about. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen looking at that statement for 20 minutes. Each charge told a story. Romantic dinners, overnight stays, expensive gifts. A man celebrating Valentine's Day in Atlanta while his wife waited for a phone call in Texas. I got up, found a manila folder, and wrote David, evidence, on the tab. The credit card statement went in first, but I knew it wouldn't be alone for long. Men who lie about work trips don't usually limit their lies to geography. I started a list on the back of an envelope, questions to research. Hotel charges. Restaurant receipts. Flight records. Work schedule verification. Phone records. Credit applications. By the time my daughter knocked on my door, I had 17 questions written down and a plan forming in my mind. She came in looking confused and worried, the way people look when they know bad news is coming but haven't figured out what it is yet. Mom, what's going on? I handed her the credit card statement. This came to my address by mistake. She read it twice, then looked up at me with eyes that were trying not to understand. There has to be an explanation. I hope so, honey. But we're going to find out for sure. The Atlanta hotel charge posted at 11:47 p.m. His Houston flight didn't land until the next morning. Screenshot that timeline in your mind. Comment, caught, if you've ever found proof someone hoped you'd never see. For someone who worked in IT security, he left more digital breadcrumbs than a lost hiker. The laptop sat on my daughter's kitchen counter, still logged into his personal accounts. She'd asked me to help her figure out how to change the Netflix password after he'd moved out temporarily following our credit card conversation. But once I opened that laptop, changing streaming passwords became the least of our concerns. His browser history was a roadmap of deception. February 10, 11:23 a.m. Google search for best romantic restaurants Atlanta downtown. February 10, 11:31 a.m. Open table reservation for 2 at Canoe Restaurant. February 10, 11:47 a.m. Atlanta hotel deals February weekend. Mom, my daughter said, looking over my shoulder. He told me he couldn't even leave the Houston office for lunch. I kept scrolling. The digital trail got worse with every click. Dating app activity, Bumble profile active February 12, 2:15 p.m. Profile status, single. Location, Atlanta, Georgia. Last active, February 23. Tinder messages, 17 conversations in 2 weeks. All with Atlanta area women. All while married to my daughter. But the dating apps were just the beginning. His saved bookmarks told a more complete story: apartment rental sites in Atlanta, job search engines filtered for Georgia positions, even a bookmark for Georgia divorce law simplified. He was planning to leave, my daughter whispered. I found something else in his saved passwords file, a second email address I'd never heard of. When I logged into it, I found 2 months of correspondence with a real estate agent in Atlanta's Buckhead neighborhood. They'd been looking at condos together. Not David alone. David and someone named Rebecca. The email chain included photos of apartments, discussion of move-in dates, and a lease application. Both signatures were already on file with the property management company. Who's Rebecca? My daughter asked. I clicked through more emails. Rebecca Martinez, 28, marketing coordinator at a firm in downtown Atlanta. They'd been together for 8 months according to the message history. She thought David was divorced. One email from Rebecca made my hands clench. Baby, I can't wait until March when you're finally free. No more weekend-only relationships. No more sneaking around. March. That was next month. I printed everything. Email threads, dating app screenshots, apartment applications, restaurant reservations. Each page added another layer to a pattern so obvious I wondered how he thought he'd never get caught. Then I found the most damaging evidence of all: GPS location data from his phone, automatically backed up to Google. Every place he'd been, every day, for the past 6 months. The map showed 2 distinct life patterns. Houston Monday through Wednesday. Office, hotel, airport. Atlanta Thursday through Sunday. Rebecca's apartment, expensive restaurants, furniture stores, jewelry shops. He'd been living 2 completely separate lives, in 2 different cities, with 2 different women. And he'd been documenting every moment of it through his own devices. The technology makes it impossible to hide, I told my daughter. But it also makes it impossible to deny. I created a new folder, David, Digital Evidence. 3 hours of searching his own laptop had given me enough proof to end any argument about what he'd been doing and with whom. The reservation was for 2 people. The credit card charge showed dinner for 4. Drop, traced, if you think technology makes secrets impossible to keep. She didn't take notes during my story. She just counted the documents I laid across her desk. Margaret Webb had been practicing family law for 22 years. Her office walls were covered with certificates, photos with judges, and a bookshelf filled with legal texts that looked well used. But it was the box of tissues on her desk that told me she'd heard stories like ours before. Mrs. Thompson, she said after I'd finished explaining the situation, how long did it take you to gather all this? 3 weeks of serious digging. But I'd been suspicious for months. She picked up the credit card statements first, then the dating app screenshots, then the email printouts. Her face didn't change expression, but I watched her eyebrows raise slightly when she saw the apartment lease with 2 signatures. "This is very thorough documentation," she said. "Almost forensic quality. Is it enough?" She spread the papers across her desk like a puzzle, grouping them by category. Financial records in one pile, digital evidence in another, timeline documentation in a third. "It's more than enough to prove adultery and deception. But let me ask you something more important. What are your daughter's financial vulnerabilities right now?" That was the question I'd been dreading. "They have joint bank accounts. Joint credit cards. The house is in both names. He handles all the financial paperwork because he works in tech and she trusts him with numbers." Margaret nodded. "And he has access to everything." "Everything." She reached for a legal pad and started making a list. Joint accounts can be emptied without the other spouse's knowledge. Credit cards can be maxed out. Home equity lines can be opened. Investment accounts can be liquidated. How fast can that happen? If he's planning to leave in March like his emails suggest, he could drain everything in a single day and be gone before she realizes what happened. I felt my stomach drop. We'd been focused on proving his affair, but we'd missed the bigger threat. A man planning to abandon his marriage doesn't just leave, he takes whatever he can carry. What do we do? Margaret was already reaching for forms from her desk drawer. "We file an emergency motion first thing tomorrow morning. Asset freeze, temporary restraining orders on all joint accounts, and immediate discovery demands for any hidden accounts or assets." "How long does that take?" "If I file before 9 a.m., we can have a judge's signature by noon. All his access to joint assets gets frozen before he knows we've taken legal action." She started filling out paperwork while she talked. "Your documentation gives us everything we need. The judge will see a clear pattern of deception and financial planning to leave. Courts don't like it when one spouse hides assets while planning divorce." I watched her write in precise legal language, translating our family crisis into court documents that would have the power of law behind them. "What happens when he finds out?" "He'll panic," Margaret said without looking up from her writing. "Men like this count on having all the control and all the information. When that changes suddenly, they make mistakes." "What kind of mistakes?" "They try to move money they're no longer allowed to touch. They contact the other woman and create more evidence. They lie to their attorneys and get caught. The shock of losing control makes them sloppy." She finished the first form and started a second one. "Mrs. Thompson, your daughter is very lucky to have you. Most people don't discover this kind of deception until after the money is gone." She reached for the emergency motion forms. "We file tomorrow morning before he knows we know." Ever felt that moment when someone finally believes your proof? Comment validated if you've been there. The courthouse clerk stamped our filing at 8:47 a.m. His phone started buzzing at 9:15. Margaret had warned me this would happen fast once we filed the paperwork. "The court system sends automatic notifications," she'd explained. "He'll get a text message telling him his bank accounts are frozen before he even knows why." I sat in the courthouse cafeteria with terrible coffee, waiting for her call. My phone was face down on the plastic table, but I could feel it like it was burning a hole through the surface. Any minute now, David would realize his world had just changed forever. At 9:03 a.m., Judge Harrison had signed our emergency motion. Asset freeze on all joint accounts. Temporary restraining order preventing him from accessing their shared credit cards. Discovery demand for any hidden financial accounts or assets. All of it effective immediately. Margaret had been right about the judge's reaction to our evidence. 22 years on the bench, he'd told her, and I've never seen documentation this complete from a family member. Usually we're working with suspicions and tears. This is like having a private investigator's report. My phone buzzed at 9:16. Text from my daughter, "David's calling me freaking out. Says his credit card got declined at the gas station. What's happening?" I texted back, "On my way over." Don't answer his calls until I get there. But I knew he wouldn't stop with declined credit cards. A man who'd been planning his exit strategy for months wouldn't give up just because his access got cut off. He'd try to move money he didn't know we'd already protected. Margaret called at 9:23. It's working exactly like I predicted. He just tried to transfer $15,000 from their joint savings to an account I've never seen before. The bank blocked it and called our office. Where was he trying to send it? Account registered to Rebecca Martinez in Atlanta. There it was. He wasn't just planning to leave my daughter. He was planning to take her money with him to fund his new life with his girlfriend. The bank has security footage of him at the branch, Margaret continued. Trying to make the transfer in person when the online system wouldn't let him. He told the teller there was some kind of system error. I drove to my daughter's house thinking about timing. If we'd waited another week to file our motion, that $15,000 would be gone. If we'd waited another month, who knows how much more he would have moved. When I got there, my daughter was sitting at her kitchen table staring at her phone. He's called me 12 times. Left 8 voicemails. All saying the same thing: there's been some kind of banking mistake and he needs me to help him fix it. Have you listened to them all? The first 3. Then I stopped. Mom, he sounds desperate. I sat down across from her. Honey, desperate men do desperate things. That's why we got the legal protection first. She looked at me with eyes that were starting to understand the full scope of what we'd discovered. How much money was he planning to steal? We don't know yet. But we stopped him from finding out. My phone rang. Margaret. Mrs. Thompson, we've got another development. He's at his attorney's office right now demanding they file an emergency countermotion. But here's the problem: his attorney doesn't know about Rebecca, the Atlanta apartment, or the dating apps. David's been lying to his own lawyer. What does that mean for us? It means his attorney is about to get blindsided with evidence that proves his client has been lying to him for months. Lawyers don't like being lied to by their own clients. The bank called at 10:30. Ma'am, someone's trying to access accounts we just froze. Type frozen if you've ever stopped someone mid-scheme with paperwork. His Houston office confirmed what I already knew. He'd requested vacation days for every business trip to Atlanta. I'd been putting off this phone call for 2 days, but Margaret insisted we needed employment verification for our case. If he's been lying about work travel, his employer will have records that prove it. The HR representative at David's company sounded confused when I explained what I needed. Ma'am, are you sure you have the right employee? David Thompson requested personal time off for all those dates you mentioned. Personal time off? Yes, ma'am. Vacation days. He submitted the requests months in advance. I was sitting in my car outside the grocery store, writing down every word she said. So when he told his wife he was traveling for work, he was actually using his vacation days? That's correct. And I should mention, he never filed any expense reports for business travel during those periods. If these had been work trips, he would have submitted receipts for reimbursement. My hands were shaking as I wrote. David hadn't just been lying to my daughter about where he was going. He'd been using up all his vacation time to be with Rebecca while telling his wife he was working mandatory overtime. Can you tell me how many vacation days he's used this year? All of them. 22 days total, spread across 7 different trips. All requested for Thursday and Friday, extending his weekends. 7 trips. 7 long weekends in Atlanta with Rebecca while my daughter stayed home alone, thinking her husband was working 18-hour days for demanding clients. Is there anything else unusual about his recent requests? The HR woman paused. Well, he did ask about early retirement options and pension transfer procedures. Wanted to know about cashing out his 401k if he left the company. My blood went cold. When did he ask about that? Last month. Said he was considering relocating for family reasons and wanted to understand his options. Family reasons. He meant Rebecca. I thanked the HR representative and sat in my car for 10 minutes, thinking about what this meant. David hadn't been planning to just leave my daughter. He'd been planning to leave Houston entirely, take his retirement money, and start over in Atlanta with a woman who didn't know he was married. When I got home, I called my daughter to share what I'd learned. "Mom, this is worse than just cheating." "I know, honey." He was planning to disappear with everything. Our savings, his retirement, probably money I don't even know about. I could hear her crying, but it wasn't the hopeless crying from earlier weeks. It was angry crying. The kind that leads to action instead of paralysis. What do we do now? We keep digging. If he lied about work travel, he probably lied about other things. Margaret wants to subpoena his employment records, his travel receipts, and his company credit card statements. How long will that take? She's filing the subpoenas today. We should have everything by next week. But I was already thinking ahead to what else we might find. A man who lies to his wife, his employer, and his attorney probably has other secrets. Bank accounts we don't know about. Credit cards in his name only. Maybe even investments or properties he's been hiding. Employment fraud leaves permanent records. Subscribe before your trust costs you more than money. That afternoon, I made a list of every institution that might have David's financial information. His bank, his employer, his insurance company, his investment broker, his credit card companies. Margaret could subpoena all of them if needed. But the employment records had given me an idea. If David had been careful enough to request vacation days for his trips, he might have been careful about other things too. Travel reservations made with company discounts. Hotel bookings that generated points or rewards. Rental car agreements with his employer's preferred vendor. Every lie creates a paper trail. And paper trails are exactly what courts need to see. HR mentioned something else. He's been asking about early retirement options and pension transfers. Ever caught someone in a lie so big it created more lies? Drop avalanche below. The lease had both their names on it. She wasn't my daughter. The property management office in Atlanta's Buckhead neighborhood had been surprisingly helpful when I called. I'd told them I was David's mother-in-law, helping the family organize paperwork for tax purposes. Not technically a lie, since I was organizing paperwork, just not for taxes. "Oh yes, Mr. Thompson and Ms. Martinez," the leasing agent said cheerfully. Lovely couple. They signed a 2-year lease back in January. Very excited about the apartment. January. While he was still married to my daughter. While he was still living in their house in Houston. While he was still promising her they'd start trying for children this year. Can you tell me the rental amount? $2,800 per month, plus utilities. They paid the security deposit and first 2 months up front. Cash payment. $2,800 a month. That was more than my daughter's mortgage payment. And he'd been paying it for 2 months while contributing to household expenses in Houston like nothing had changed. Did they use a cosigner? No ma'am. Both had excellent credit scores. Mr. Thompson provided employment verification from his IT company, and Ms. Martinez showed income verification from her marketing firm. Both names on the lease meant both were financially responsible for the apartment. It also meant Rebecca wasn't some casual girlfriend. She was David's domestic partner in the eyes of Georgia rental law. I don't suppose you could tell me what address he used for contact information? Let me see. He used a Houston address for mail forwarding, but his emergency contact is listed as his Atlanta residence. His Atlanta residence. Not temporary. Not visiting. His residence. I thanked the leasing agent and hung up, then stared at my notes for 5 minutes. David had established legal residency in 2 states simultaneously. That created tax implications, insurance complications, and probably violated the terms of his employment in Houston. But it also proved intent. You don't sign a 2-year lease, pay cash up front, and list an address as your residence unless you're planning to live there permanently. I called Margaret immediately. "This is huge," she said after I read her my notes. Joint lease agreements create legal obligation between parties. If Rebecca signed as his domestic partner, she might not even know he's married. What do you mean? Think about it. If he told her he was divorced, and she signed a lease with him, she's been defrauded too. She's financially obligated to an apartment with a man who lied about his legal status. That gave me an idea I wasn't sure I was brave enough to follow through on. Margaret, could I contact Rebecca directly? Long pause. Legally, yes. But Mrs. Thompson, are you sure you want to have that conversation? I thought about my daughter crying herself to sleep every night for 3 months while David was building a life with another woman. I thought about the $2,800 a month being paid to maintain a secret apartment. I thought about Rebecca sitting in that apartment, probably planning a future with a man who was planning to steal money from his wife to fund their relationship. She deserves to know the truth. If you do this, record the conversation. With her permission, of course. Anything she says about David's lies could be valuable evidence. That evening, I sat in my kitchen with Rebecca's phone number written on a piece of paper. I'd found it in David's saved contacts on the laptop. The number had a 404 area code, Atlanta. I practiced what I'd say for an hour before I finally dialed. She answered on the second ring. Hello? Rebecca? This is Mrs. Thompson. I'm David's mother-in-law. Complete silence. Rebecca? Are you there? David told me his divorce was finalized last year. And there it was. The lie that had made everything else possible. The lease renewal was already signed. For another 2 years. Comment duplicate if you've discovered someone living 2 completely different lives. Systematic diversion of marital assets. That's what the forensic accountant called theft. Margaret had recommended Patricia Kim, a certified fraud examiner who specialized in divorce cases involving hidden assets. If there's money you don't know about, Patricia will find it, she'd promised. 3 weeks after handing over every piece of financial documentation we could gather, Patricia called with her preliminary findings. Mrs. Thompson, your son-in-law has been very busy. Can you meet me at my office this afternoon? This is the kind of information that's better discussed in person. Her office was in downtown Houston, filled with computers, multiple monitors, and charts that looked like something from a detective movie. Patricia spread out printed reports across a conference table that could have seated 12 people. Let me start with what we know for certain, she said, putting on reading glasses. David opened 4 bank accounts that your daughter never knew existed. All in Texas, all using their joint address, all requiring only his signature. She showed me bank statements going back 18 months. Account 1, $47,000. Account 2, $23,000. Account 3, $18,000. Account 4, $39,000. I did the math in my head. $127,000? That's just the current balances. The total amount diverted from joint accounts is much higher because he's been spending from these hidden accounts regularly. She flipped to another page. Credit cards. 3 cards your daughter never signed for, all using her credit profile to qualify. 2 are maxed out. Total debt, $31,000. How is that legal? It's not. Forging a spouse's signature on credit applications is fraud. The credit card companies will be very interested in these signature comparisons. Patricia pulled out a timeline chart that looked like a flowchart. The pattern is very clear. Every month, David transfers money from joint accounts into hidden accounts. Then he uses the hidden accounts to pay for Atlanta expenses. Rent, restaurants, gifts, travel. She pointed to specific dates on the timeline. Look at this pattern. January 15th, $3,200 transferred to hidden account. January 16th, $2,800 payment to Buckhead Property Management. Same pattern every month for 6 months. So he was using our money to pay for the apartment with Rebecca? Your daughter's money. Yes. Patricia turned to the most damaging section of her report. Investment accounts. David liquidated your daughter's 401k from her previous job without her knowledge. $18,000. He also took a home equity loan against their house without her signature on the paperwork. My hands were shaking. How much? $45,000. The loan was approved because the house has significant equity and David provided forged documentation showing your daughter's consent. I looked at the numbers adding up on Patricia's charts. Hidden bank accounts, forged credit applications, liquidated retirement funds, unauthorized home equity loans. David hadn't just been having an affair, he'd been systematically stealing from his wife to finance his double life. Is this enough evidence to press criminal charges? Mrs. Thompson, this is enough evidence to have him arrested for identity theft, bank fraud, and forgery. The district attorney will be very interested in this case. Patricia handed me a thick folder containing every document, every timeline, every financial analysis she'd completed. The total theft is $127,000 over 18 months, but the financial damage is much higher when you include the fraudulent debt he created in your daughter's name. Predators repeat patterns across victims. Subscribe to recognize the warning signs others missed. I drove home thinking about how carefully David had planned everything. Hidden accounts opened months before he started the affair. Credit cards applied for using forged signatures. Retirement accounts liquidated without authorization. Home equity loans obtained through document fraud. This wasn't the behavior of someone who'd fallen into temptation. This was the behavior of someone who'd been planning financial theft from the beginning of his marriage. When I got home, my daughter was waiting in my kitchen. "Mom," David's attorney called. "They want to discuss settlement terms." I set Patricia's report on the table between us. "Honey, after you read this, David's attorney is going to want to discuss a lot more than settlement terms." The final calculation, $127,000 diverted over 18 months. Starting the week after their wedding. "Where would you like to meet?" "Remember Café Luna? Where Sarah and I had our first date? They have that quiet corner booth where we could talk privately." Café Luna. Where he'd charmed my daughter 3 years ago with stories about his work in IT security and his dreams of starting a family. Where he'd told her he'd never felt this way about anyone before. Where she'd called me afterwards saying she thought she'd met the man she'd marry. "David, I don't think a coffee shop is the right place for the conversation we need to have." "Then where?" I thought about all the evidence sitting in front of me. Bank records, credit card statements, apartment leases, employment verification, forensic accounting reports. 3 months of investigation that had revealed a level of deception I hadn't known was possible. How about the courthouse steps? Tomorrow at 2 p.m. Margaret will be there. Long silence. Why does your lawyer need to be there? Because lawyers are good with documents, and we have a lot of documents to discuss. Mrs. Thompson, you don't understand the whole situation. Actually, David, I understand it better than you think. I've been understanding it for 3 months. What do you mean? I picked up the credit card statement that had started everything. February 14th, Maggiano's Little Italy, Atlanta. $127.50. You told Sarah you were stuck in Houston meetings that couldn't even break for dinner. Another long silence. I can explain that. February 15th, Ritz-Carlton, Atlanta. $289. February 16th, Tiffany & Company, Atlanta. $347.25. Rebecca Martinez enjoyed a very nice Valentine's weekend, didn't she? How do you know about Rebecca? David, I know about everything. The apartment lease you both signed. The vacation days you used for the business trips. The $127,000 you've stolen from joint accounts. The credit cards you opened with forged signatures. The home equity loan you took without Sarah's consent. I could hear him breathing, but he wasn't talking. So when you say I don't understand the whole situation, you're wrong. I understand exactly what the situation is. The question is whether you want to discuss it at a coffee shop or in front of a judge. I'll meet you at the courthouse. The next day, I arrived 15 minutes early with Margaret and 2 boxes of evidence. David came alone, wearing the same suit he'd worn to my daughter's birthday party last year. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Margaret opened her briefcase and laid documents across the courthouse steps like we were having a picnic. Bank statements, apartment leases, employment records, forensic analysis reports. "David," she said calmly, "we can resolve this cooperatively, or we can let the criminal court system handle it. Those are your only two options." He looked at the evidence spread between us, then at me, then back at Margaret. "What do you want?" Margaret handed him a settlement proposal. Full restitution of stolen funds. Immediate divorce with no contest. Transfer of house deed to Sarah's name only. And a written confession for our records. David read through the settlement terms twice. "And if I don't agree?" "Then tomorrow morning we file criminal charges for identity theft, bank fraud, and forgery. You'll be arrested at your office." His final words, "You don't understand." I handed him the forensic report. "Actually, I do. Ever refuse to be manipulated by someone who underestimated your preparation?" Comment prepared. His attorney opened with 50-50 asset division. Ours opened with criminal fraud charges. The law office conference room felt smaller with 4 attorneys, 2 clients, and enough evidence to fill a small library. David had hired the kind of lawyer who wore expensive suits and talked in phrases like amicable resolution and mutual best interests. Margaret had arranged everything like a chess game. She'd placed the forensic accountant's report directly in front of David's attorney, with Patricia's business card paper-clipped to the cover. "The alternative," Margaret said calmly, "is criminal prosecution for identity theft, bank fraud, forgery, and embezzlement. Based on the amounts involved, we're looking at felony charges carrying potential prison time of 2 to 20 years. The room went quiet except for the sound of Richardson reading through evidence files. "I'll need time to review everything with my client." Margaret checked her watch. "We file criminal charges at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning unless we have a signed settlement agreement. That gives you 18 hours. Richardson gathered up all his papers, all our evidence, everything Margaret had placed on the table. "We'll be in touch." After they left, I asked Margaret how she thought it went. "Better than expected. Richardson realizes he's been representing a client who lied to him about the facts of the case. That puts him in a very difficult ethical position. What do you think they'll do?" "They'll spend tonight doing damage control calculations. How much will criminal defense cost versus how much will settlement cost? How likely is David to get convicted versus how likely is he to rebuild his life afterward?" Margaret started packing evidence back into boxes. "Mrs. Thompson, your documentation made this negotiation possible. Without your investigation, we'd be arguing about he said she said accusations. Instead, we're presenting mathematical proof of systematic theft." They asked for 48 hours to consider terms. We gave them until 5 p.m. Drop evidence if you believe preparation beats manipulation every time. The marriage license search showed 3 different states. He'd done this before. I couldn't sleep the night after our settlement meeting. Something about David's panicked expression in the hallway kept bothering me. Men don't usually develop that level of deception overnight. The apartment lease, the hidden accounts, the forged signatures, it all seemed too practiced, too smooth. At 6 a.m., I made coffee and opened my laptop. If David had done this to my daughter, maybe he'd done it to others. I started with Texas marriage records. David Thompson, age 34, married Sarah Elizabeth Chen on June 15, 2019. Their certificate looked normal. Standard paperwork, both signatures present, nothing suspicious. Then I searched Georgia records. David Michael Thompson, age 32, married Jennifer Lynn Martinez on April 3, 2017. My hands stopped moving on the keyboard. Martinez. Same last name as Rebecca. I printed the Georgia marriage certificate, then stared at it for 10 minutes. Different middle name, age discrepancy, but same signature style as David's current documents. Alabama records came next. David M. Thompson, age 29, married Amanda Rose Carter on September 12, 2014. 3 marriages. 3 different states. 3 different women. I called Margaret immediately. Mrs. Thompson? It's barely 7 a.m. Margaret, I found something. David has been married before. Twice. Long pause. Are you sure? I'm looking at marriage certificates right now. Alabama in 2014, Georgia in 2017, Texas in 2019. Send me everything you found. This changes our entire case. I spent the morning gathering divorce records from Alabama and Georgia. Both cases showed identical patterns. Hidden bank accounts discovered during proceedings. Credit cards opened without spousal knowledge. Assets mysteriously transferred before separation. The Alabama divorce decree stated, evidence presented shows systematic concealment of marital assets and fraudulent use of joint financial accounts. Judgment, $45,000 restitution ordered. The Georgia divorce showed similar language, pattern of financial deception including unauthorized credit applications and diversion of joint funds. Settlement, $38,000 restitution plus assumption of fraudulent debt. But here's what made my blood run cold. Both previous wives had filed restraining orders. Not for physical abuse, but for financial harassment after divorce. David had continued trying to access their accounts, use their credit information, and manipulate their financial records even after legal separation. I found something else in the Georgia records. Rebecca Martinez wasn't just David's current girlfriend. She was his ex-wife Jennifer's younger sister. He'd been married to Jennifer Martinez from 2017 to 2018. After their divorce, he'd started dating her sister Rebecca in 2019. The same year he married my daughter. My phone rang. Margaret. Mrs. Thompson, I've been reviewing the records you sent. We're dealing with a serial predator. What do you mean? 3 marriages, 3 divorce settlements involving financial fraud, 3 restraining orders. David Thompson has been running the same scheme for at least 5 years. I looked at my timeline notes. Alabama wife, 2014 to 2016. Georgia wife, 2017 to 2018. Texas wife, my daughter, 2019 present. Each marriage lasting approximately 2 years. Each ending with evidence of systematic financial theft. Margaret, there's something else. Rebecca Martinez is his second wife's sister. She paused, that's extremely disturbing. It suggests he targets families, not just individuals. The most recent divorce was finalized 6 months before he proposed to my daughter. Type pattern, if you think some people are professional predators. The check cleared at 2:47 p.m. By 3:15, his Atlanta apartment was empty. Richardson called Margaret at 4:30 a.m. My client accepts your settlement terms. I was making breakfast when Margaret called to tell me. Full restitution. Complete asset transfer. Divorce with admission of fault. And Mrs. Thompson? He's waiving all rights to appeal. What does that mean? It means he knows he's beaten. Men like David only surrender completely when they realize fighting will make things worse. We met at the bank at 2 p.m. to oversee the fund transfers. David sat in a chair by the window, signing papers without reading them. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in 2 weeks. The bank manager confirmed each transaction as it processed. Joint savings account, $47,000 transferred to Sarah's individual account. Hidden account number 1, $23,000 transferred. Hidden account number 2, $18,000 transferred. Hidden account number 3, $39,000 transferred. Final transfer complete, the bank manager said. Total restitution, $127,000. David signed the house deed transfer next. Margaret had brought a notary to witness his signature removing his name from the property title. My daughter would own their home outright, with no mortgage and no shared ownership. The credit card debt? Margaret asked. Richardson slid papers across the table. All fraudulent accounts transferred to David's responsibility. Sarah's credit report will be cleared within 30 days. I watched David sign document after document, transferring away everything he'd stolen and everything he'd tried to claim. His signature got smaller with each page, like he was disappearing with every pen stroke. At 3 p.m., we walked out of the bank. David got into a moving truck parked at the curb. Richardson had told us earlier that David was leaving Texas immediately, returning to Georgia to handle personal matters. What personal matters? I'd asked. He needs to explain to Rebecca Martinez why he's suddenly divorced and unemployed. Unemployed. David's company had fired him the day after our criminal evidence was shared with HR, falsifying expense reports and using vacation days for fraudulent purposes violated their ethics policy. By 3:15, Margaret had confirmation from the apartment complex in Atlanta. The lease has been terminated. Property cleared out this morning. David hadn't just lost his marriage, his house, and his job. He'd lost his entire double-life infrastructure in a single day. My daughter met us at Margaret's office to collect copies of all final paperwork. The divorce decree, the house deed, the bank transfer receipts, the credit card closures. Everything documented, everything legal, everything permanent. How do you feel? I asked her as we walked to our cars. Like I can breathe again. That evening, I sat in my kitchen organizing all our evidence files. 3 months of investigation, dozens of documents, hundreds of hours of research. All of it had led to complete victory in less than 4 hours of settlement negotiation. Margaret had been right about something she'd said weeks earlier. Men like David count on having all the control and all the information. When that changes suddenly, they surrender completely rather than risk exposure getting worse. David's moving truck had probably reached the Georgia state line by now. Tomorrow, he'd have to explain to Rebecca why he was suddenly homeless, jobless, and legally single. He'd have to tell her about the 2 previous wives, the 3 previous divorces, the pattern of financial fraud that had finally caught up with him. 1 manila folder. 18 months of evidence. Complete financial restoration. Comment: Justice, if you believe patience and paperwork can defeat any predator. The divorce attorney kept copies of everything. For the next family who calls, she said. Margaret's filing system looked like something from a law enforcement office. 3 metal cabinets, each drawer labeled with case types. But the bottom drawer of the middle cabinet was different. It was labeled Financial Predator Patterns. Mrs. Thompson, she explained, your case created something I've never had before. Complete documentation of a serial financial predator's methods. This becomes a template for recognizing similar cases. She opened the drawer to show me thick folders organized by predator behavior type. Marriage fraud, identity theft patterns, asset concealment methods, victim selection profiles. Each folder contained photocopies of our evidence with personal information removed. How often do you get cases like David's? More than you'd think. But usually families don't realize what they're dealing with until after the money is gone. Your early detection and documentation created a roadmap other families can follow. Margaret had done something I hadn't expected. She'd shared our case evidence with the Texas Bar Association's Family Law Committee, the Houston District Attorney's Economic Crimes Division, and 3 victim advocacy organizations. Why? Because David Thompson isn't unique. The methods are too sophisticated, too practiced. There are others out there running identical schemes. She showed me a letter from the DA's office. They were using our forensic evidence as a training template for prosecutors handling financial abuse cases. The signature analysis, the timeline documentation, the asset tracking methods, all of it was being taught to other investigators. We've also shared information with divorce attorneys in Alabama and Georgia. David's previous victims might be able to reopen their cases if they can prove he committed crimes that weren't discovered during their original divorces. That gave me an idea I should have had months earlier. Margaret, can you help me contact David's previous wives? For what purpose? To warn them. If he's running the same scheme with Rebecca, his other victims might be in danger of identity theft, credit fraud, ongoing financial harassment. Margaret reached for her phone. I'll make those calls today. 2 hours later, she called me back. Mrs. Thompson, you were right to be concerned. Amanda Carter in Alabama has had credit cards opened in her name every year since their divorce. She thought it was random identity theft. And Jennifer Martinez? Someone has been using her social security number to apply for apartment leases in multiple states. The applications are always rejected, but they're damaging her credit score. Both of David's previous wives had been dealing with ongoing financial harassment for years. Credit applications they never made, bank accounts opened in their names, loan inquiries that appeared on their credit reports randomly. Can they stop it? Now they can. Our evidence proves David has been systematically using his former wives' personal information for fraudulent purposes. That's federal identity theft with a clear pattern of repeat offenses. Margaret had already contacted the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. They're very interested in our documentation. Particularly the interstate nature of David's operations and the evidence of ongoing victim harassment. 3 months later, Margaret called with news that made everything worthwhile. Mrs. Thompson, we received a call today from a woman in Florida. She's engaged to a man named David Thompson who claims to be divorced, works in IT security, and has been asking her to add his name to her bank accounts. Same David? Same David. But this time, his fiancée's sister found our case information online and recognized the pattern. Margaret had created something more valuable than a successful divorce case. She'd created a warning system that could protect future victims before they became victims. The next victim might be your neighbor. Subscribe to learn how one family's evidence saves others. We had their evidence template ready. 3 manila folders full of red flags, warning signs, and documentation methods. Complete instructions for recognizing financial predators before they could cause damage. David Thompson's career as a serial marriage fraudster was over. But our work protecting other families was just beginning. Drop protect if you believe one family's justice can shield others. She signed the mortgage papers alone this time. Her signature looked stronger. 6 months after the settlement, my daughter bought a house across town. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. The old house, now legally hers, held too many memories of checking bank statements and wondering why money was missing. I went with her to the closing. Same bank where we'd sat watching David sign away everything he'd stolen, but this time the atmosphere was completely different. Sarah sat at the conference table with confidence I hadn't seen since before her marriage. Mrs. Chen, the loan officer said, "Your credit score is remarkable. 847, that's in the top 1% nationally." Sarah looked at me and smiled. It should be good. I've been checking it every week for 6 months. The mortgage was entirely in her name. No cosigner needed, no joint ownership, no shared financial responsibility with anyone. The house was hers, a 3-bedroom craftsman with a front porch and a backyard big enough for the garden she'd always wanted. Final signature here, the real estate agent said, and you're officially a homeowner. Sarah's signature was different from the careful, hesitant writing I'd seen on documents during the divorce proceedings. This signature was bold, decisive, taking up more space on the page. After the closing, we drove to her new house together. She had the keys in her hand, but she sat in the car for a minute before getting out. "Mom, can I tell you something?" "Of course." "When I was married to David, I never felt like I owned anything. Even things that were mine before we got married felt like they belonged to both of us, or mostly to him." She looked at the house, then at the keys. "This is the first thing I've owned completely by myself since I was 22 years old." We walked through the empty rooms, her voice echoing off hardwood floors and clean white walls. No hidden bank statements in desk drawers. No secret phone calls to Atlanta. No wondering if the man sleeping next to her was stealing money while she was at work. "What are you going to do with all this space?" "Live in it. Really live in it." David always made me feel like I was taking up too much room, even in our own house. Sarah had grown during the divorce process. Not just stronger, but more herself. She'd started taking art classes, joined a hiking group, even applied for a promotion at work that she'd been too afraid to pursue while married. The promotion came through last week, she told me as we stood in what would become her art studio. $15,000 raise. I'm going to use the extra money for travel. Travel. Something she'd stopped doing after marrying David because he'd always had reasons why trips were too expensive or poorly timed. Where do you want to go? Everywhere I didn't go for 3 years. We spent the afternoon planning room layouts and paint colors. Sarah had decided opinions about everything: wall colors, furniture placement, where to put the bookshelves she'd wanted but never bought because David thought books were clutter. At 5 p.m., we ordered pizza and ate it sitting on the floor of her empty living room. Mom, I need to ask you something. What? Why did you start investigating David? What made you suspicious enough to open that credit card statement? I thought about that question for a long time before answering. Honestly? You stopped laughing. What do you mean? You used to call me every few days just to tell me something funny that happened at work, or something amusing you'd seen on TV. After you got married, those calls stopped. You only called when something was wrong or when David wasn't home. Sarah nodded slowly. I hadn't realized that. Happy people share happiness. When someone stops sharing joy, something is stealing it from them. The house key turned perfectly. No one else had ever held it. Type rebuild if you believe families who fight together heal together. The manila folder sits in my kitchen drawer now. Empty, but ready. My filing system has changed since David's case ended. The kitchen drawer that used to hold dish towels and oven mitts now contains empty manila folders, each labeled with a different type of family crisis. Financial fraud evidence. Employment verification. Property records. Digital evidence. All waiting, organized, prepared for whatever comes next. I've received 14 phone calls in the past year from families dealing with situations similar to ours. Word spreads in strange ways. Margaret's law office refers people to me. Sarah's coworkers mention my story to friends who mention it to relatives. Each caller starts with the same phrase: I heard you helped your daughter with a problem like this. The conversations follow similar patterns. Suspicious financial activity. Partners who travel frequently for vague business reasons. Credit cards that appear without explanation. Bank balances that don't match expected amounts. Behavior changes that family members can't explain. I listen to each story, take notes, and share what I learned during our 3 months of investigation. The importance of documentation. The value of timeline creation. The necessity of professional help from attorneys and forensic accountants. But mostly, I teach them about the power of paying attention. Trust your instincts, I tell them. If something feels wrong, start writing it down. Date everything. Save everything. Don't confront the person until you have enough evidence to protect yourself legally. 3 families have avoided marriages to men with histories similar to David's. 2 women have discovered financial fraud early enough to stop it before major damage occurred. One grandmother in Michigan helped her son realize his wife was systematically emptying their retirement accounts to fund a gambling addiction. Margaret calls it the Manila Folder Network. Families teaching families how to protect themselves from financial predators. I keep Margaret's business card in every folder, along with contact information for Patricia Kim, the forensic accountant who helped us calculate the scope of David's theft. Both women have become specialists in cases involving family financial fraud. Mrs. Thompson, Margaret told me recently, your case has become the template for how these investigations should be conducted. We've used your methods in 12 other cases this year. The Houston District Attorney's Office has used our evidence files to train prosecutors in financial abuse cases. The documentation techniques, the timeline creation methods, the forensic accounting analysis, all of it is now part of their standard investigation protocol. But the most important result has nothing to do with legal procedures or prosecutor training. Last month, Sarah called me with news that made everything worthwhile. Mom, I met someone. My first reaction was panic. After David, How could she trust her judgment about men? Tell me about him. His name is Michael. He's an architect. He's been divorced for 2 years, has joint custody of a 7-year-old daughter. And Mom? He showed me his financial records on our 3rd date. He what? He said he'd heard about David through mutual friends, and he wanted me to feel completely safe about his financial situation. Bank statements, credit reports, tax returns. Everything. I started laughing and couldn't stop. Mom, are you okay? Honey, any man who voluntarily shows you his bank statements on the 3rd date is either completely trustworthy or completely crazy. And crazy men don't usually have good credit scores. His credit score is 823. Then he's trustworthy. Sarah is happy again. Really happy, not performing happy. She calls me to share funny stories. She makes plans without checking with anyone else first. She bought a piece of art because she liked it, not because someone else approved of it. The manila folder in my kitchen drawer is empty, but it represents something more important than the evidence it once contained. It represents readiness. The willingness to pay attention, to document problems, to take action when action becomes necessary. Some battles are won before they're fought. The ammunition is always the truth, filed properly, dated clearly, and kept safe until needed. If you won't subscribe, tell me why in the comments. I read every reason. Predators count on your silence. But one prepared family can stop multiple predators. The next victim might be someone you love. The folder waits, ready for whatever comes next. Because protecting family isn't something you do once and forget about. It's something you stay prepared to do for as long as people you love need protecting. Drop the one lesson you'll carry forward from this grandmother's fight.